What's bubbling, magical people? Welcome back to the Witching Hour with Miss Merlin, where we like to talk about all things witchy and magical. Your one-stop source for everything witchcraft, different deities and classifications, magic, mediumship, psychic gifts, spirituality, plant medicine, healing, nature, and much, much more. I'm Kimmy, aka Miss Merlin, high priestess and shamaness, medicine woman, psychic medium, and witch extraordinaire. So let's jump on in. Today's topic is Merlin. Very surprised that I haven't already done this topic, but I had some fact checking I wanted to finish. So here we go. I hope you guys enjoy it. So his name is Merlin, the most famous magician of all time. You've heard of him, even if you don't know the details. He's a wise old wizard, the master of magic, the one who shaped the fate of King Arthur and Camelot. But the truth is, Merlin is more than just a kindly mentor in a pointy hat. His story is much bigger, older, stranger. He's a prophet, a trickster, a kingmaker, and an outcast, a loner also. Known for his immeasurable intelligence, some say that he was born from something not entirely human. Others say he knew too much, saw too far, and carried the weight of the future that he could not change. He's been called a druid, a madman, a sorcerer. He's been a shadow in the woods, and the power behind thrones. He shaped history and then disappeared into legend. But how much of the legend is true? Where did Merlin come from? What did he know? And how did the most powerful magician in the world meet a fate that no one, perhaps not even he, could escape? This is the story of Merlin, the legendary wizard of Arthurian mythology. Merlin's origins are as mysterious as the magic that he wields. His story isn't neatly written down and packaged up with a bow in a single book, nor does he have a fixed beginning. Instead, his legends shifted and evolved over time, making it very difficult to pinpoint where it truly comes from. So I'm going to try. Some stories paint him as a wild prophet, others the son of a demon, and some suggest that he is an ancient druid. That's how I feel about it. Who outlived his time. His legend is a tangled mix of history, myth, and medieval imagination, with no real clear starting point. But here we go. We're going to start here. He was born in Britain in the 5th century during a time of war and chaos. His mother was said to be a princess and his father a demon, an incubus. So those are night demons that terrorize you in your sleep. There can be SA involved, night terrors, things like that, if you're not familiar with what an incubus is. This demon's intention in conceiving Merlin was to create a being who would use his supernatural powers to corrupt and destroy. But apparently, a holy man named Blas baptized him at birth, freeing him from the devil. Yuck! I hate this interpretation. That's with Christianity's spin on things. It couldn't have been the influence of his mother's beautiful nature, innocence, or purity. No, it's got to be this holy man. In this version, Blas raises Merlin, teaching him the secrets of nature, magic, and prophecy. And this is so contradictory because there is no way that a holy man in that time who could have baptized him could have been the same person who was teaching him magic and prophecy. That's not happening. In other versions, he did know his origins, and therefore he knew the responsibility and the power held within his gifts. In another tale, he's raised by his mother in a village when Vortigern, not a very good guy at all, terrible person, usurped the throne in the village that Merlin and his mother were living in by orchestrating the death of the king at the time, Constant. The rightful heir, Aurelius Ambrosius, and Uther Pendragon. Okay, they were brothers. Uther Pendragon is the father of King Arthur. So those two fled to what was at the time called Brittany. Okay, so King Vortigern was attempting to build a really mighty fortress. He called it the Virtuous Tower, or a similar name depending on which telling you're reading. However, no matter how many times he builds this thing, it mysteriously collapses overnight. And he couldn't figure it out. So the king is very frustrated, and he goes to all his advisors and soothsayers, and it's like, what's the problem? So desperate, they tell him that he needs to find the blood of a boy born without a father. And it should be mixed into the mortar to strengthen the foundations. Yeah, really grim. So messengers were sent across the land, and they eventually found a young boy named Merlin. Though in a lot of earlier versions, his name is actually Ambrosius. But when this boy is brought to the king, he's like, I'm not being sacrificed. Nuh-uh. And he revealed the true reason why the tower kept collapsing. So he told them that there was 2 dragons that were slumbering in a pool underneath it. And as they awoke, the dragons engaged in a fierce battle, and this was causing the ground to shake and collapse, and the towers kept falling. So Merlin prophesied that the meaning of this was the red dragon represented the native Britons, and the white dragon symbolized the invading Saxons. So Saxons is southern Scandinavia, northern Germany-ish. The outcome of this fight foretold the future struggles and eventual dominance of one over the other. By uncovering the dragons, the mystery was solved, and Merlin's reputation as a powerful seer and wise counselor was then established. So the king then ordered Merlin to stay with him, and the very cunning Merlin agreed to that on the condition that the throne be returned to the rightful heir. And Vortigern was like, nope, no way am I giving up my throne. So he said, not happening. So Merlin escaped in the night. He went out looking for Aurelius. He found him, told him what was going on, and convinced him to come back and reclaim his throne. So that is exactly what Aurelius did. He enlisted the help of the Romans, and they formed a really, really big army. And then Vortigern was actually burned to death in his own precious tower. So now the rightful king, Aurelius, asked Merlin to be his advisor. So during this time, it was Merlin who created Stonehenge. Different accounts of that. It was him who gave the knowledge to have the people carry the stones, or he did it magically. So the Aurelius version has men carrying the stones under Merlin's advisement to the location. But I like it better when he does it by magic. So Aurelius did not hold the throne for very long. He was poisoned by a Saxon disguised as a doctor who gave him this medicine. Here, drink this, but it was poison. He died. So Uther, being his younger brother and his successor, was now crowned king. Again, Uther Pendragon, the father of King Arthur. So he also had Merlin stay as a trusted advisor and friend. So the earliest writings that we find about Merlin he's not found in the grand courts of Camelot, but wandering in the wilderness, lost in madness. This version of him appears in Welsh poetry. He's called Myrddin Wilt, or Myrddin the Wild. And according to legend, Myrddin was once a bard or ovate, an advisor to a 6th century warlord named Gwyndwylw, ruler of what is now southern Scotland. So Myrddin supposedly fought alongside him in battle against rival Britons. However, when Gwyndwylw was killed, Myrddin lost his mind. Stricken with grief and horror at the bloodshed and everything that he had witnessed. Sounds a lot like PTSD, doesn't it? Like when soldiers come back from war. Yeah. So he fled into the Caledonian forest and lived amongst the animals, speaking only in riddles and cryptic prophecies. So some say that he survived on nothing but berries. People that encountered him claimed that he was gifted or cursed with second sight, depending on how you looked at it. Doomed to wander alone, predicting fate, but being unable to change it. This version of Merlin, not a grand court magician, nor a powerful sorcerer, but something closer to a druid. Again, very connected to nature, living amongst it, talking to animals, plant medicine, all of that stuff. A man deeply connected to nature, untouched by the rules of civilization. His prophecies, spoken in fits of madness, were said to foretell great battles, the rise and fall of kings, and the ultimate fate of Britain. But despite his visions, he was seen as little more than a wild hermit, misunderstood and feared by those who crossed his path. For centuries, Merlin remained a local legend, a Welsh figure known only in poetry and oral storytelling. But this all changed in the 12th century when a man named Geoffrey of Monmouth reimagined him entirely. Geoffrey, a cleric and historian, wrote a book in 1136 called The Historia Regum Britanniae, the history of the kings of Britain. It was a grand retelling of British history, part myth, part invention. And in it, Geoffrey introduced this new version of Merlin, now called Merlin, and transformed him into something far greater than a mad prophet. He became a powerful sorcerer, a master of prophecy, and a kingmaker who influence stretched across Britain's history and now internationally. Merlin is the most famous wizard in the world, most recognizable. Geoffrey merged multiple legends to create his version of Merlin. He took inspiration from Merlin Wilt, and he also added some elements from other traditions that at the time that inspired him, because he was a great scribe. So he had all this access to all of this written knowledge. He actually scribed a lot of stuff into Latin, because Latin was the learned language at the time. So in Geoffrey's story, Merlin is not just a mere man. He's the son of a mortal woman, a princess, and a supernatural being, an incubus. The parentage makes Merlin unique. Merlin is guided by forces beyond the mortal world. He's both a man and something more, existing between the realms, neither entirely good nor entirely evil. Geoffrey's version of Merlin laid the foundation for every version that followed. No longer just a mad prophet or wild druid, he's now a figure of immense power, a wizard, a manipulator of kings and energy, and a force to be reckoned with that shaped Britain's destiny. His influence only grew from there. Later, writers would expand on this vision, adding their own details, myths, and magic to Merlin's fame. Over time, he became Arthur's mentor and protector, ensuring that the boy would one day become king, and a good king at that. The mastermind behind the sword and the stone, proving Arthur's divine right to rule, a master of magic wielding spells beyond human comprehension, and a tragic figure doomed by his own fate, despite his own power. So what did he look like? I'm sure I don't have to put visuals to go along with this. Oh, my eyes were just drawn up to the clock. It's 11:11 right now as I'm recording. Make a wish. All right. Anyways, I'm sure everyone who is listening to this right now has a vision in their head of what Merlin looks like. You've probably heard of him at least once before, right? So how did different writers and artists depict him? He's the most powerful magician ever to exist. He's the most instantly recognizable figure in Arthurian legend. Yet, what he actually looks like varies wildly depending on the version of the story. So Merlin shapeshifts in both terms of his actual magic and how he's been portrayed. He doesn't begin as a wise old wizard, but a wild, half-mad hermit, like I said, living in the forest, as much like a druid. Legends of Merlin Wilt and the Wandering Prophet After witnessing the horrors, fled to the woods, lost his mind. He wears tattered clothes and animal skins, having abandoned civilization, being wild, making him, again, look more like a druid than a noble scholar. He speaks in riddles and cryptic verses, muttering prophecies that only make sense later after they come true. So this feral, untamed kind of version of Merlin represents the old ways before kings, knights, and castles. And though he may appear as a madman, he possesses a deep hidden wisdom, which he is very much burdened by. And by the time he's reimagined by Geoffrey of Monmouth, his appearance changes significantly. Now Merlin is no longer this wild prophet, but a trusted advisor. So this version of him is kind of how we see him today, depicted as that old man with the long white flowing beard, the flowing beard representing that ancient knowledge, right? And wisdom and power. He wears long robes, sometimes adorned with stars and arcane symbols, runes, reinforcing that mystical status. His eyes are very piercing, filled with knowledge beyond mortal understanding. And he often carries a wooden staff, either as a walking stick or as a focus for his magic. This version of Merlin is calm, composed, and intentional. He moves between the world of men and the world of prophecy, never fully belonging to either one. This depiction of Merlin, the wise old wizard in the long robes with the flowing beard, has become the template for nearly every fictional wizard that's followed him, like Gandalf from The Lord of the Rings, Dumbledore in Harry Potter, even Obi-Wan Kenobi, for those Star Wars fans out there. It's part of that archetype, right? Wise man with the robes and the beard who gives the magical sword and teaches him Jedi magic. Like, come on. Obi-Wan is so Merlin. The 14th and 15th centuries, when alchemy, astrology, and hidden sciences kind of became popular, Merlin was again reimagined as a scholar and philosopher. So instead of wandering the forest, you now see him depicted as sitting in hidden towers or grand libraries, studying. You see him depicted with scrolls. He's associated with alchemy and sorcery. You would see all of these like very ancient texts, stacks of books, and of course the pointy hat, which is like the cone of power, right? The reason why witches wear those is at the top of your head is your crown chakra, right? That's where you're gathering your energy. Okay, so you're sending it up into the universe. The witch's hat is like the cone of power, kind of directs it to go straight up. Hence why they wear them. So this kind of version of Merlin represents the idea that knowledge itself is a kind of magic, and that those who understand the hidden laws of the universe can control them. This portrayal is likely also influenced by the real-life scholars and alchemists of the time, who were often rumored to also possess mystical powers due to their understanding of astronomy, chemistry, natural philosophy, etc., etc. Merlin is one of the most complex figures in Arthurian mythology. A man who exists in both history and legend, walking the line between civilization and the untamed forces of the unknown. He's a force of nature, sometimes a guide, sometimes a trickster, and sometimes something much harder to define. He doesn't follow the rules of men, nor does he seek power in the way that kings or knights do. Instead, he moves through the world on his own terms, often seeming like a man out of place, belonging neither fully to the present nor to the future. Though Merlin is often depicted as Arthur's mentor, his true role in the legend is far more expansive than that. He's not simply a tutor, teaching a young king how to rule. He's the architect for Arthur's destiny, the unseen hand guiding Britain's future. He does not seek power for himself, nor does he rule a kingdom. But without him, Arthur would never have existed, let alone have become the legendary king. Merlin's methods are not always noble, and his actions often blur the line between wisdom and manipulation. He understands the world does not always reward goodness, and sometimes deception is the only way to ensure the right outcome. He's known for using trickery and delusion to accomplish his goals, whether it's disguising people, shape-shifting, setting up elaborate tests, or bending events in ways that no one else understands. Merlin's schemes often involve manipulating those around him through magic. His actions show that he's willing to make more questionable choices if he believes it's necessary for the greater good. Merlin's realistic. He understands the flaws of men, the failures of kings, and the way that power corrupts. He doesn't waste time hoping people will make the right choices. He ensures that they do. And we kind of have that in common. Maybe that's why I relate to him so heavily. Those who underestimate Merlin often find themselves outwitted. He's neither good nor evil. His loyalty is to fate, not to people. Merlin has no interest in ruling. Unlike the Knights of the Round Table, who are bound by their oaths, or the kings who are bound by their crowns, Merlin's free. He doesn't serve a kingdom. He doesn't swear allegiance to any rulers. He's not a warrior. He's not a nobleman. Yet his influence outweighs all of them. He exists outside power. Yet he's the one who shapes it the most. Without him, Arthur would never have been born, as I mentioned earlier. I will tell you about how he was the architect in that in a moment. So Merlin never takes a seat at the round table, and he doesn't participate in its quests, nor does he fight the battles. He creates the legend, but never becomes a part of it. But he does. It wasn't his intention to, though. This makes him both crucial and kind of invisible. So, as the architect for Arthur's reign, he never stands beside him as an equal, though. He belongs to a different world. Not just a prophet or magician, he's a guardian, and something far older than Arthur's kingdom. He comes from a time before Christianity, representing the last remnants of ancient Druidic tradition. He sees Camelot as a fleeting moment, and he understands that Arthur's rule is not the beginning of something eternal, but something fading out. Rather than resist it, he ensures that it happens. Merlin's role is not to stop change, but to guide it. And he can't really form real friendships or relationships because he already knows how they're going to end. He doesn't really build a home because he's never really meant to stay in one place. Merlin walks a solitary path. He doesn't belong to the world that he helps. He exists outside of it, watching and guiding, but never truly belonging. His greatest flaw is that he's still human. He may see the future, but he can't escape it. He may guide others, but he can't control what happens to himself. I understand this a lot, being psychic myself. And in the end, despite all his knowledge and all his magic and all his power, Merlin doesn't fall in a battle, and not by a sword, and not by any one thing that he ever saw coming. And I'll get into that in a little bit. So, we will discuss how he is the architect in Arthur's birth. So again, Arthur's father was King Uther Pendragon, the High King of Britain. His rule wasn't secure, though. The Saxons, as I said, were pressing in. Rival lords also were plotting against him. And he was consumed with a dangerous obsession also. Uther had become obsessed and fallen desperately in love with Igraine, who was the wife of Duke Gornois of Cornwall. And Gornois, suspecting Uther's intentions, took his wife to Tintagel Castle, which is a fortress which was really, really well defended, so armies couldn't breach it. Uther, though, was not a man who took no for an answer. So he went to Merlin and he was like, I have to have her, you have to help me. Merlin was like, no, I don't do that kind of thing. And Uther would not stop. But Merlin also knew that the union between these two would result in the birth of Arthur. So he allowed it. This is one story about Merlin I don't like. Anyways, Merlin had Uther drink a special potion that he concocted, which basically shape-shifted him into Gornois. so he could go and lay with Igraine. So that's what happened. And that night that he lay with Igraine, Arthur was conceived. So to make this deal, Merlin put in a condition that when Arthur was born, he was not to be raised in the castle. He had to be raised somewhere else. So Uther reluctantly agreed. So Arthur was raised outside of the palace and all of that nonsense. And Uther ended up dying, and the kingdom collapsed into chaos. He died without a clear heir, and Britain fell into civil war. Rival lords were fighting over the throne. Merlin advised a plan. A mysterious sword appeared embedded in the stone, bearing a simple inscription. Whoso pulleth out this sword in the stone is the rightful king of Britain. So, Arthur being raised away, he was raised with another nobleman, Sir Ector, and his family, and he had a stepbrother named Kay. So there was a great tournament that was announced here. And the greatest knights and kings and all of that were all invited here to this tournament. And his brother Kay was going to be involved in this. So all of these people gathered in London for this great tournament. And Sir Ector was there with Kay and Merlin. And all these other warlords and noblemen and all that had tried to pull this sword from the stone. None of them had any luck at all. So while the tournament was going on, Arthur, still being unaware of his true parentage, living as the adopted son, growing up alongside his foster brother, had gone to this tournament, and his brother was just getting ready and prepared to fight. And in the last moment, he realized that he'd forgotten his sword. So turning to Arthur, he ordered him to go retrieve it. Arthur went back to the lodgings and looked around, and he couldn't find the weapon. So really panicked, he searched for a replacement. And his eyes fell upon that mysterious sword lodged in the stone. To Arthur, this wasn't a legendary test. It was simply a sword that he needed to retrieve, and right now. So Arthur casually pulled the blade from the stone, unaware that that single action just declared him the king of all Britain. So Merlin had set this up for one reason and one reason only. Not to prove Arthur's strength, but to reveal his fate. Arthur had not been raised to crave power. He had no ambition for the throne. Yet destiny had placed it in his hands. Merlin guided him to this moment, ensuring that when the time came, Arthur would take the crown, not out of greed, but because it was his destiny. With Arthur crowned as king, Merlin continued to shape his journey, helping him build Camelot, the Round Table, and the ideas of chivalry and justice. Merlin didn't act just as a mere advisor. He was Arthur's greatest teacher. He warned him of the dangers of power and greed. He taught him the lessons of past kings, and he did this to best prepare him for the challenges ahead. He had seen the future, seeing the betrayals of the battles and the final tragedy that would bring it all crashing down. Yet he didn't intervene to stop it. Why? Because he understood something that Arthur and everyone else never could, that fate can never be changed. So what type of powers did Merlin have? So we discussed prophecy already, very famous for prophecy. He was a seer, a magician, a master of illusion, and a force that seemed to exist outside the normal bounds of time and space. His powers were both a gift and a burden, allowing him to shape fate, but also trapping him with a future that he was powerless to change. Merlin's greatest weapon was his mind, his magic, and his ability to manipulate reality itself. Just how powerful was he, though? And what were the limits of his abilities? His most defining ability, of course, the gift of prophecy, a power that made him both revered and feared. He did not simply predict vague possibilities or educated guesses about the future. He saw events unfold with terrifying clarity, often long before they happened. But his visions were not always straightforward. They came in cryptic riddles, symbols, synchronicities, and glimpses of fate that were often difficult to interpret. And boy, can I relate to that. That is how spirit speaks, folks. In signs, symbols, synchronicities, cryptic stuff. Yeah, it's all up to your intuition to figure it out. So that makes perfect sense to me. So this made his prophecies really valuable and also really dangerous. Kings and warlords sought his guidance, but they also feared him as well, because knowing the future meant holding power over those who didn't. Merlin's magic wasn't just about seeing the future. He could control perception. He was a master of illusion, capable of making people see what he wanted them to see, bending reality to suit his plans. He could vanish at will, appearing and disappearing as though stepping between worlds. In some tales, he shapeshifted, not only to the form of animals, but also to spirits or even elements of nature itself. This made him nearly untouchable, allowing him to move unseen, escape danger, and influence events without ever being noticed. His abilities also extended into creating an entire landscape of illusion. A landscape of illusion! Casting mists over battlefields, making castles appear where none ever existed before, causing warriors to see visions that would shake their resolve. To his enemies, this made him terrifying and unpredictable, and to his allies, it made him an invaluable weapon. His connection to the natural world was also undeniable. Many believed that his magic was not tied to books or arcane rituals, but to the land itself. He could summon storms, call down rain and lightning upon those who opposed him. He could speak with animals, gaining knowledge from creatures that often others ignored. Some even believed that he could bend earth and water to his will, shaping the landscape as he saw fit. His influence over nature, connecting him back again to his more druid roots. Unlike the dark magicians of later, Merlin's magic was rarely destructive. It was a force of balance, one that worked with nature rather than against it. His power wasn't just supernatural, it was intellectual. He possessed knowledge that far exceeded ordinary men, including secrets of the old gods, the ancient druids, and the lost magical arts. He understood the stars, the movement of celestial bodies, and the hidden forces of the universe. He knew potions, charms, enchantments, plant medicine. In some tales, he was even credited, like I said, with creating Stonehenge and other sacred objects. This vast knowledge allowed him to be a teacher, strategist, guide, not just for Arthur, but anyone who seeks his wisdom beyond the reach of mortal minds. His magic did have boundaries, and there were forces that even he couldn't overcome. Fate is unbreakable. No matter how powerful, he could not ever prevent certain destinies. He saw Arthur's downfall long before it came and could do nothing to change it, making his knowledge of the future both a gift and a curse. His emotions also could be his undoing. Though very wise, Merlin was still a human, so he had the same weaknesses and the same desires. His love for Vivienne, Nimue, the Lady of the Lake, would ultimately lead to his downfall. More on that in a minute. He's bound by the balance of magic, unlike later sorcerers of fiction who wielded power without any consequences. Merlin's abilities came with natural limits. He could guide, but he couldn't rule. Not that he wanted to. He could protect a kingdom, but he couldn't change the fate of what was woven into the foundation. His power was not meant to conquer, but guide. But despite all his power, even he could not escape his fate. With all his wisdom, all his foresight, he failed to see, or perhaps refused to accept, his own downfall. And in the end, it wasn't war wasn't a rival sorcerer, not the weight of prophecy that brought about his undoing. It was love. The greatest wizard who had shaped the course of history found himself trapped by his own heart, ensnared by the one person he trusted the most, Vivienne, the Lady of the Lake, also known as Nimue. This was not just the end of Merlin, it was the end of Camelot. So let's talk about it. The story of Merlin and Vivienne, also known as Nimue. Nimue is fae, okay, so fairy. There is a Netflix show. Gustav Skarsgård starred in it as Merlin. And in that, Nimue is his daughter. So, same premise though. He knows the outcome. That's why he's trying to push her away. But yeah, so that's a little bit of a difference there. But definitely interesting and pretty on point with the mythology. So the story of Merlin's love for Vivienne varies depending on the source, but the core of it remains the same. Merlin, who lived a life of wisdom, secrecy, and control, became hopelessly out of control and enchanted by a woman who, for all her beauty and grace, had her own ambition. Vivienne was no ordinary woman. She was a fae. She was the Lady of the Lake, a figure of magic and mystery who would later bestow Excalibur upon Arthur. But I'm not going to get into that story today, just for time. So if you want to look that up on your own, go ahead. Please feel free. But before that, she was a student of Merlin, learning the secrets of his power, absorbing his knowledge piece by piece. And Merlin, despite his foresight, despite his unmatched wisdom, fell in love with her. Some versions paint their relationship as a tragic romance, a love that was genuine but doomed. Others depict Vivienne as a cunning manipulator. That is the most common narrative. Someone who seduced Merlin, not with passion, but with a hunger for knowledge. In this version, Merlin knew full well that she would betray him. He'd seen it in his visions, and yet he let it happen anyway. Perhaps he believed he could change his own fate, or perhaps he didn't care. So Vivienne was not satisfied just learning from Merlin. She wanted his power for herself. So she played the role of the devoted student, carefully prying his secrets from him. Merlin, blinded by love, or by some strange acceptance maybe of his destiny, gave her everything. One by one, he taught her all of his most powerful secrets and spells. And she just waited for the moment where he was no longer useful to her. Then she turned his own magic against him. In some stories, she gets him to show her the spell to open the door to the other world. And when he does that, she pushes him inside and closes the door behind him, seals the door behind him. In others, she seals him in an invisible prison or a cave or a hollow tree where he remains trapped until eternity, unable to escape. So also, there was a show put up by the BBC years ago. I think it was 2008 when it started. It was called The Adventures of Merlin. And in the final season of that, he gets locked in the Crystal Cave by Morgan Le Fay. So that's another Morgana or Morgan Le Fay. That is Arthur's stepsister. And also in some tales, Merlin teaches her and she's the one who betrays him. So it depends on where you look. Anyways, no matter the version, the result is the same. Merlin's helpless. His voice silenced, his power locked away, disappearing from history, and Camelot left without its greatest protector. And then Camelot crumbles. The most haunting question about Merlin's downfall is, did he allow it? With all the gifts of prophecy, all the gifts of foresight, how did he fail to see his own destiny? Or did he see it coming and choose not to fight it? Yeah. Some legends suggest that Merlin welcomed this imprisonment, that he'd grown really, really weary of war, destruction, betrayal, corruption, and seeing the future and being unable to stop the certain outcome of it feeling like no matter what he did, things would fail, and that his own magic couldn't even hold off fate forever. So he just allowed himself to be taken, right? Or at least like choosing an end. That was an end. So in this saga, his last act is that of acceptance, really, and not defeat. So he set Arthur on his destined path. There was nothing more he could really do but let the story continue without him. So Merlin's imprisonment is marked the beginning of the end for Arthur and Camelot. Without his guidance, Arthur would face betrayal that he couldn't foresee. Without Merlin's wisdom, the kingdom's foundations would shake. And without his protection, dark forces would rise. Merlin was never truly gone, though. His influence remained, his teachings lived on in Arthur's ideals, and the formation of the Round Table, in the magic woven into the heart of Camelot itself. Some say he still lives. There is a tale that speaks of Merlin, not as dead but waiting, trapped in a timeless prison where he sleeps until the world needs him again. And when the world is on the brink of disaster, Merlin will then rise again. And remember, shapeshifter. So Merlin could rise as he, she, they, them, creature, spirit, anything. Even the form of a woman. Wink, wink. Until then, his legend endures, his magic still lingering in the midst of Britain and internationally. The story of the wizard who shaped kings, saw the future, and loved too deeply remains one of the greatest tales ever told. So some of the key differences in some of the shows that I mentioned and the mythology. I mentioned the Netflix series. So like Nimue, Vivienne was his daughter in that. There was also The Adventures of Merlin. 2008 to 2012. It was Morgana who put him in the crystal cave. Uther Pendragon also in that series was alive in it. He wasn't in the mythology. And King Uther Pendragon had banned magic under penalty of death. So Merlin had to hide his magic. When in truth, he was very, very famous for his abilities. And he was actually an advisor because of his abilities to Uther Pendragon. The young Merlin TV series kind of portrayed him as a young man discovering his power, whereas traditional mythology often depicts him as older, established, and a sage, advisor, and magician. Arthur's age too, like they were young men at the time, and like growing up kind of together, and that's not really what happened, because as I mentioned, Merlin was the architect of Arthur's conception. So he was a wise advisor to kings, most notably to Uther Pendragon. He was very instrumental in Arthur's conception and his rise to power, and all of it wouldn't have happened without him. So there's also another legend about his lost books. Apparently, these writings are from lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes, because again, Merlin can go between worlds. So all these incarnations, he would gather all this ancient and arcane knowledge from all these different factions and scribe it. And apparently there were these secret writings that contained dangerous magical secrets, hidden prophecies, and powerful spells never ever meant for human hands. The ways to manipulate fate, life and death, how to invoke spirits, the secrets of alchemy, universal secrets, spells that could bend reality, knowledge also from other worldly realms, how to open and close doors, and what those other worldly realms entail. The fate of entire kingdoms and dynasties to come for years and years and years and years. And these books apparently were hidden to prevent misuse, and they were enchanted so that only the worthy could invoke their knowledge, much like the sword and the stone. So there was also then someone wrote something called The Lost Books of Merlin. This was by Douglas Munro, and it presents 3 mythological stories perpetually restored from rare 16th century Druid texts. And this aim is to impart ancient Celtic and Druidic wisdom. So following each story, it's cool. There's a little grimoire, which is like a spell book, right? Offering instructions. The book intends to provide readers with a way to connect with Druidic philosophy and practices for more modern for when it was written and for personal transformation. And people actually went looking for these books, the lost books. Cornelius Agrippa and John Dee, if you want to look them up. They were some pretty famous male witches, and they went in search of these texts, but it was for their own selfish reasons. So, if you feel worthy, and you should, and you want to connect with Merlin, I'm going to tell you how. You want to approach this with a blend of intention, symbolicism, and respect. Remember, Merlin is the greatest sorcerer of all time, and he deserves that respect, okay? First of all, create a suitable sacred space. I would do this if you want to connect with Merlin out in nature, in a more druidy kind of setting, perhaps near a really ancient tree or a flowing body of water. Cleanse the space with smoke first, okay? Or frequency. If you have your phone on you and you just want to throw on some frequency real quick, okay? You can use like sage or lavender. That's really good. Setting a clear intention for peaceful communication. If you want to bring along some crystals, use those deep purples, the royal colors, the royal purples, really associated with Merlin. Deep blues, metallics, also representing the moon, like silver, gray, forest greens, and browns also. So you could use like amethyst for wisdom, clear quartz, labradorite also. If you wanted to use some herbs, mugwort is great for divination. Oak leaves also. Oak leaves and the oak tree is sacred to druids. Also the connection to the ancient knowledge. You could also use some rosemary. If you wanted to use a candle, again, the colors I mentioned. If you're going to have fire out in nature, please be cautious and be careful. We don't want you setting any forest fires, okay? If you want to make an offering, it's going to be something as simple, yet very meaningful. So like a piece of polished stone that you found on your walking journey, or like a staff that you used to walk with that resembles a Merlin staff. You could leave that as an offering. A feather that you found, or maybe a written intention or a poem. You visual folks, you could enter a meditative state, focusing on visualizing Merlin in your third eye. Not necessarily a specific image, but maybe a feeling, or the feeling of ancient wisdom, magical power, a certain symbol, anything really that you connect to. With a clear and respectful intention, I would call out to Merlin. Perhaps not with a loud voice, but maybe a focused thought or a soft chant or singing would work too. Express your desire to connect and your reverence for his knowledge and abilities. Remain open to any signs or messages that may come through. It could be a feeling, an image in your third eye, a sudden insight, unexpected sound, occurrence in the environment. Just be receptive and follow your intuition always. And it's very, very important too, as with any communication or encounter with a deity, ancestor, magical being, etc., express gratitude for any connections made, whether subtle or profound. Leave an offering, please, out of respect. Approach the endeavor with respect, intention, and connection to the symbolic language of the magic. You can certainly create a very meaningful and insightful experience if you're just open to receiving it. Now, a lot of you have asked me where my name came from, and I'm going to tell you. So again, this is Miss Merlin getting vulnerable. So there was a time years ago when I was in a very, very, very dark place. And I was actually thinking of ending my life. Unfortunately, it was that bad. I was in a spot where I had experienced a lot of the same things that Merlin did. I had been betrayed by people that I loved the most, that were supposed to love and protect me. I was still trying really hard to continue my sobriety journey, because as some of you know, I was an addict. I don't run from that. I've been clean like 10 or 11 years. The end of April is my anniversary. But I was still kind of struggling. I was just coming out of it around that time. And anyways, like I said, I was in a really, 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 really bad place. And I was sitting on my bed and I was crying. And I was like, what do I do? What do I do? I feel powerless right now. And as I've mentioned before, Spirit speaks to me a lot through media, right? Through songs, through TV, certain clips, things like that. And my TV, like it does, it came on all by itself. And it was on that show, The Adventures of Merlin, that I had discussed, the one from 2008 to 2012. And it was on a certain scene where Morgana had locked Merlin in the crystal cave. And I'm just going to play it for you, because this is kind of what snapped me out of my moment and when I became Miss Merlin. I don't want to get into copyright trouble for this, but I don't think it's going to be as effective if I don't play it for you. All right, so again, keep in mind, I was laying in my bed crying. My television started all by itself, came on all by itself, and the volume went up by itself at this exact part of the show, The Adventures of Merlin. So I don't own the rights to this. I'm going to say that, and I don't want to get in any copyright trouble for it.
Merlin. My son. Are you here? Are you real? Dead or alive? Real or imagined? Past or present? These things are of no consequence. All that matters is that you heed the words of your father who loves you. Do not let go, Merlin. Do not give in.
I have no reason to go on. The battle is already over. Morgana has won.
Only if you accept defeat. But if you fight, if you let hope into your heart, Morgana cannot be victorious.
What hope is there without my magic?
Merlin, you are more than a son of your father. You are son of the earth, the sea, the sky. Magic is the fabric of this world, and you were born of that magic. You are magic itself. You cannot lose what you are.
How do I find myself again?
Believe, Merlin. Believe what your heart knows to be true. That you have always been, and always will be.
Always will be.
Rest now. Rest, my son. And soon, you shall awaken into the light.
I get emotional still every time I listen to it. And I have chills all over my body. I don't know if any of you are experiencing the same thing, but I'd love to hear about it if you are. So, as always, I'll leave all of my contact information in my link tree listed below. If you'd like to book a personal service with me, you can find all my services and pricing on my Instagram or my TikTok. Those are the ones I'm active on the most, in my pinned videos on TikTok and my highlights on Instagram. You can always email me to get any other additional information. And until next time, guys, stay magical. Bye.